Thank you. I'm so excited to talk about food allergies today. All right, so here are today's learning objectives. Just a quick disclaimer though, there's been a lot of advancement in food allergy nutrition over past years. While we will talk about some of these areas, today I am primarily focusing on the psychosocial impact of pediatric food allergy nutrition. I do not have anything to disclose financially. However, I should say that in addition to being a registered dietitian, I am also a parent of a child with food allergies. In fact, that experience was so significant that it became the catalyst to my career change in pediatric food allergy. And it's not just my child. Current estimates are 1 in 13 children have a food allergy, which ends up averaging about 1 to 2 kids in every classroom here in the United States. Of those kids, 40% are allergic to more than one food, and 42% have a history of at least one severe food allergy reaction. Now, I should mention that there may be some discrepancy in the exact prevalence. The physician confirmed prevalence might be closer to 5%, whereas another survey has found 11% of parents report that their child has a food allergy. But regardless, we know the prevalence of food allergy is growing. And I'm going to pause here because as humans, we tend to lose empathy and really the psychosocial understanding when we focus just on numbers and statistics. So throughout the presentation today, I'm going to talk about those statistics, but I also am going to share some lived experiences from food allergy families just to help paint a better picture of what life with food allergies is really like. So we're all on the same page. Today's definition for food allergy is an adverse health effect arising from a specific immune response that occurs reproducibly on exposure to a given food. And the key word here is reproducibly. Individuals with food allergy should have some type of symptom every time they eat that food. Now, it might be a different symptom, but there should be some type of reaction every time that allergen is ingested, whether it's intentional or accidental. Since I'm a dietitian and not a medical provider, I'm not going to get into the nuances of food allergy diagnosis today, but on the screen, there is a quick breakdown of the different types of food allergy. And I want to stress that the nutrition management of food allergy really depends on a clear clinical diagnosis. So briefly, IgE-mediated food allergy is what most of us associate with food allergy. It's also known as hypersensitivity or classic food allergy, and it's an immediate reaction, typically occurring in less than 2 hours. There are many possible symptoms, including hives, but of course, the biggest concern with an IgE-mediated food allergy is always the risk for anaphylaxis. But non-IgE-mediated food allergies are also real and tend to be misunderstood. This alone can have a huge psychosocial impact on families with non-IgE-mediated food allergy. And if you remember from the last slide, any type of food allergy involves an interaction between the allergen and the immune system. The difference with the non-IgE-mediated food allergy is that it still involves the immune system, just not that IgE antibody. These reactions are typically delayed, often 4 to 6 hours after ingesting the trigger food, and symptoms can include things like food refusal, failure to thrive, projectile vomiting, irritability, and more. And I should add there is a third category of mixed IgE, non-IgE mediated food allergy, and that can include things like atopic dermatitis or EOE. Food allergies are not the same as food intolerance, and food allergy symptoms can overlap with the symptoms of a variety of other medical conditions. But I do want to emphasize that food sensitivity is not the same thing as non-IgE mediated food allergy. So getting everyone on the same page here, let's highlight some common misconceptions about IgE testing, both skin prick and blood work. First, no comprehensive test exists to find all the trigger foods. The first and most important step with suspected food allergies should be a thorough clinical history and then a thoughtful selection of tests, because panel testing on its own can be misleading. And what I've learned from leading allergists is that in general, any food allergy testing should focus on suspected trigger food. Doing panel testing without a clinical history is not recommended. Okay, on average, Both skin prick tests and serum IgE blood tests give false positive results about half the time. And as we'll explore later on, these false positive tests can cause unnecessary emotional and financial burdens to food allergy families. On the other hand, a negative food allergy test usually means that the food is safe. However, there can be false negatives around 5% of the time. A supervised food challenge is really the gold standard for confirming either a suspected food allergy or tolerance. And then finally, neither test can predict severity of an allergic reaction. Instead, the higher the IgE level or the larger the wheal, the more likely a true allergy does exist. There is no level when it comes to IgE food allergy. Someone either has an allergy or they do not. And one reason why these tests don't capture the severity of reaction well is because there are so many external factors that can influence an individual's threshold. So since I'm a dietitian, let's highlight the eating specific factor on this list, which is an interesting concept for two reasons. So first, an individual may react differently depending on if they've had trace amounts or significant quantity of the allergen. And then two, different individuals may have a different tolerance threshold, which can become significant, especially when we start talking about cross-contact risk and whether or not to avoid trace amounts of an allergen. So understanding the nuance and importance of patient-specific advice is crucial once we start talking about mitigating psychosocial distress with new food allergy families. And as the title of this presentation implies, food allergy nutrition is much more than just label reading. But first, let's look at the most common food allergens for children in the United States, and hopefully this information is just a review. Of note, egg, milk, and wheat allergy do have a much higher prevalence when you're looking specifically at children under 2 years of age. Okay. So 9 foods, the ones we saw on the last slide, are responsible for most of the IgE food allergy cases here in the United States, but individuals can be allergic to other foods. In fact, over 170 have been reported to cause an allergic reaction here in the United States. And I should add, people can have serious allergic reactions to foods from all the different food groups, not just what we would consider those high protein foods. So that was IgE-mediated or the classic food allergy, but the list of common trigger foods changes once we start to look at the different non-IgE-mediated food allergies. In the interest of time, we're only going to look at 3 of these. First up is FPIES, which is characterized by delayed, often dramatic GI symptoms. FPIES usually occurs in infants, but there are cases that persist into adulthood. Fish is going to be a big one. And while rare, there are cases of adult onset FPIES as well. There are 2 different phenotypes. There's acute and there's chronic. And finally, there's also atypical FPIES, which is when allergic sensitization develops to an FPIES trigger food, and unfortunately is often associated with a more prolonged disease course and is more commonly seen with cow's milk or egg FPIES. Common FPIE triggers are in the higher risk column and to some extent the moderate risk column as well. So in addition to milk, soy, egg, and fish, on this list, we see foods like poultry, avocado, banana, rice, and oat. And FPIES is estimated to affect about 0.5% of children in the United States, and it comes with its own psychosocial complexities. So for example, FPIES parents do report more difficulty managing food allergy when compared to children or to parents of IgE-mediated food allergy. And this can have a trickle-down effect on feeding behaviors as well as affecting growth. And the more food groups avoided correlates moderately with poorer quality of life as well as higher anxiety, both among preschoolers and parents. But the key here is we do need more research to help us guide psychosocial interventions that are specific to FPIES family. Next, we're going to look a little bit at EOE, which is an allergic immune-mediated disease that is characterized by chronic infiltration of eosinophils in the esophagus. The prevalence is increasing, and those with EOE often have a much higher prevalence of other allergic disease. So about 1 in 20 kids that have an IgE-mediated food allergy develop EOE, and you compare that to the general population, it's 1 in 2,000 kids. While adults typically have dysphagia that leads to food impaction, which we often associate with EOE, kids have a little bit different, more vague symptoms. Especially with those that have food allergies, we need to consider EOE if there are symptoms of esophageal dysfunction, and that can include things like feeding difficulty, food aversion, coughing after eating, and more. So common foods for pediatric EOE is on the screen, and I want to point it's a little bit different than what we see with adults, where nut and shellfish triggers are a bit more prevalent. In most studies, milk is going to be the main culprit, whether it's alone or in combination with other foods. Wheat, soy, and egg round out the other top 4 triggers, but in the next tier, we see peanuts, beef, and chicken coming into play. Several factors are key when it comes to the impact of psychosocial status of children and families with EOE, starting with the frequency and the cost of medical visits. Plus, then you start adding in endoscopies, hospitalizations, and medications. It adds up both emotionally and financially, plus the added stress over the increased cost of specialty foods or even expensive elemental formulas. And depending on a family's geographical location, specialty stores can be difficult to access, and this can be a major issue in parts of Iowa, although online ordering has helped somewhat address this discrepancy. There is also some evidence of greater emotional and behavior problems as children with EOE grow older, as well as higher rates of anxiety symptoms and depression when compared to healthy populations. And finally, let's look at food protein-induced allergic procticulitis, which is also known as FPIAP or allergic procticulitis. This typically presents as specks or streaks of blood mixed with mucus in the stool of an otherwise healthy infant. Unlike other allergies, studies suggest either a higher or equal prevalence in breastfed babies, and it's also typically short-lived. Many children outgrow allergic procticulitis by 12 months. However, just like everything else with food allergies, it's always possible that allergic procticulitis could be seen in toddlers or older children. Reintroduction of trigger foods is typically done at home after physician blessing, unless a specific patient would have a higher risk factor for IgE-mediated food allergy as well. And here is the list of common trigger foods for allergic procticulitis. As you can see, it's a little different in formula-fed infants as well as breastfed infants, and these trigger foods would be coming from the maternal diet. Cow's milk is most commonly implicated, but also soy, egg, wheat, and corn are going to be, again, common trigger foods from the maternal diet. Switching gears into nutrition considerations for food allergies. So when you think about all the time that goes into planning, shopping, and preparing allergy-friendly meals, common sense would suggest that food allergy would have a significant impact on a family's daily life. And this 2006 survey found at least 70% of food allergy families report a significant impact when it comes to meal planning, grocery shopping, and prepping meals for their child. And it doesn't just affect the individual. Food allergy impacts all members of a family, even those without food allergy. And then think about those families that have more than one person with allergies. Chances are not everyone has the same allergens. So we're expanding the list of foods that need to be avoided at a table possibly. Or what about those families that have other special dietary needs? Or if we're looking at children that have limited food acceptance, how does a food allergy go on to affect the family meals? This statement from a fellow Iowan and food allergy parent sums it up really well. Being a food allergy parent means waking up at 5 a.m. to make safe donuts for Donut with Mom Day at school so your child can participate like the rest of his friends and not feel left out because he has to eat something different than everyone else. As we reviewed earlier, the nutrition management of food allergy really depends on a clear clinical diagnosis, because the more suspected food allergies or the more foods that are eliminated, we tend to see a greater risk for nutritional deficiencies as well as growth concerns. And this is because elimination diets do remain the cornerstone for food allergy nutrition management. Despite all the progress we're seeing with immunotherapies at this time, there is no cure for food allergies, just the hope that your child is one of the lucky ones that will outgrow it. Which is why it's just as important that patients learn how to recognize and treat their symptoms, which is something that can unfortunately slip through the cracks during healthcare appointments. And I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm always amazed how many of my patients in front of me either don't carry 2 EpiPens or they don't know how to use their epinephrine auto injectors. So just think about that. By the time a patient gets to seeing a dietitian, how many other medical providers or specialists have they seen, as well as nurses or pharmacists? It's something that as a healthcare system, we can all do better together. But then again, when it comes to nutrition education, label reading alone is not enough. It's really just the starting point. And I'm going to talk a little bit about food labels because labeling laws in the United States are nuanced and at times confusing and even possibly misleading. So let's start with the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004, more commonly known as FELPA, which provides guidance for food labels that contain any of the top 8 allergens in the United States. There are 3 ways that these allergens can be identified on a food label. So first off, within the ingredient list using an allergen's common name. So for example, wheat. It can be done parenthetically within the ingredient list if the ingredient's not in the common name. So with this example with farina, you see wheat in parentheses behind it. And finally, in a contained statement, but if this method is used, all the common allergens in the product must be listed. And I can't stress this enough, food allergy families must read every label every time because products can and do change. Another headache and source of confusion for food allergy families is front of package labeling. So for example, there is a brand of protein shakes that it advertises as non-dairy. It's got a big non-dairy logo on the front, but then includes milk protein in the ingredient list. So according to FELPA, dairy-free is not a defined term, but non-dairy does have a little bit of a definition that allows non-dairy can allow milk protein by definition. So when it comes to food allergies, really you have to ignore whatever it says on the front and go straight to the ingredient list or look for contained statements. And again, as the saying goes, check every ingredient every time. This slide compares what's considered a tree nut in the United States, Canada, and the EU. And as you can see, it gets a little more confusing when you start to compare international definitions or labeling laws. There are 3 exemptions to FELPA in the United States, and additionally, FELPA does not apply to a long list of food and non-food items, which includes alcoholic beverages, any food product that's regulated by the USDA, including fresh meat, poultry, certain egg products, kosher labeling not related to FELPA, personal care items, which can include everything from cosmetics, shampoo, soap, and so much more. Pet foods, treats, and supplements also need to be checked for allergens. So I like to give the example of dogs. If an allergen is in their food or in some other way that they've ingested, and then they go lick a toddler's hand or their mouth, and that toddler has a food allergy, there's a chance that enough allergen could be ingested to cause some sort of reaction. And just as a side note, human supplements must comply with FELPA. And while FELPA does not apply to prescription or over-the-counter drugs, they do need to check the list of inactive ingredients for possible food allergens. And of course, any foods that are placed in a wrapper or container in response to a person's food order are not regulated by FELPA. How is everyone doing? Still with me? Can we appreciate that label reading is a bit more complex, especially when it comes to food labeling? Because now we're introducing the FASTER Act, which went into effect at the beginning of this year on January 1, 2023. And now sesame is included in our top 9 allergens, and it must be identified on a food label in plain language. It cannot be hidden under a generic term, seasoning or spices or natural flavoring. And yes, sesame allergy is very real. 1.6 million Americans have a sesame allergy. But the big elephant in the room is that major food brands are now intentionally adding sesame flour to products as a response to the FASTER Act. This is affecting everyone from food allergy families to school food service, hospitals, and more. And different areas of the country are being more impacted than others. So my challenge to you is to spend a little bit of time in the bread aisle the next time you go grocery shopping, just to see how many sesame-free options can you find in your local store. Let's add another layer of frustration to food label reading. So by law, precautionary allergen labeling statements are not required for major allergens. These are completely voluntary and include things like may contain, manufactured in a facility, or manufactured on shared equipment or shared lines. Again, these are voluntary, they're not required, and they also all mean the same thing. One statement does not carry more or less risk than the other. It's completely the company's choice if they use a statement and then which statement they use. And just to make everything clear as mud, products without these statements are not necessarily safe. You really need to know what that company's precautionary allergen policy is in order to understand what is or what's not in that product. So naturally, the next question is, should someone with a food allergy avoid products with these precautionary labels? So in other words, can trace amounts cause a significant reaction, and are there actually trace amounts of allergen protein in these products? Because how do we balance keeping kids safe without unnecessarily limiting their food options? So this study looked at 400 foods, both with and without precautionary labels for egg, milk, and peanut. And when the level of product contamination was considered per serving, the amount of egg was pretty low across all products. However, the risk of milk contamination was pretty significant. In fact, the product with the greatest risk for cross-contact was milk-free dark chocolates. About 80% of those with precautionary labels had detectable amounts of milk. Peanut contamination was also pretty significant, especially when we know some individuals can react to as little as 1 milligram of peanut protein. Finally, detectable residues of protein were found in products both with and without precautionary labels, which further emphasizes the importance of understanding a company's allergen policy and not just relying on the presence or absence of these precautionary labels. So, should these precautionary labels be avoided? And unfortunately, there's not a clear answer. It really depends on several variables. First, a child's individual threshold can be hard to define unless they've had prior reactions. So I like to give my personal example. My child has reacted twice to trace amounts of proteins in 2 different foods. So it would make sense to assume that he has a low threshold for peanut reaction, especially what we know about peanut contamination from the last study. Another factor to consider, we've seen that older children are more likely to have anaphylaxis at smaller doses, but younger children grow into older children. And so shared decision-making with this, with the family becomes really important. And then different types of allergy can affect this decision. So for example, those with FPIEs, for the most part, usually don't need to avoid precautionary labels unless they have reacted in the past. So ultimately, if a patient has a significant reaction to trace amounts of an allergen, then they really need to be careful with precautionary labels, and they really need to understand a company's allergen policy when determining a food is safe. Again, my child got hives after eating sprinkles that were manufactured on the same line as peanuts. There was no precautionary label on the bottle, so we learned our lesson the hard way about the importance of researching a company's allergen policy. So for better or worse, we have labeling laws with the top 9 allergens in the United States, but what about those foods outside the top 9? I asked my friend Kelly to share her experience of being a parent with a child that has a food allergy outside the top 9. And to her, label reading means looking at ingredient lists item by item, often rereading several times because the print is so small and the words start to run together. Label reading also means contacting the company to see what natural flavors means to them because each company uses it differently. And some won't even tell you what ingredients make up their natural flavorings because it's part of their proprietary recipe. So we just have to assume it's not safe. So let's look at some of those nutrition considerations for food allergy that are beyond just label reading. So the harsh reality is that food allergens are everywhere, not just food. Depending on the child's age and their individual threshold levels, these non-food sources of allergens may or may not pose a significant risk for allergic reaction. So for example, a toddler with a wheat allergy that is putting everything into their mouth probably shouldn't play with Play-Doh that contains wheat. But the good news is that there are recipes and even some commercial options for wheat-free alternatives. Same goes for crayons, probably not a concern for older kids, but with younger kids that have soy allergy that might still be putting things in their mouth, they may accidentally ingest some of that crayon. And then again, someone with a milk allergy probably shouldn't use hand soap that contains milk. And as crazy as that sounds, there are lots of hand soap options that contain milk. So this is just one reason why, or one reason of many, why caregivers of food allergic children, 58% report a significant impact on playing at friends' house. 59% report significant impact when it comes to school food trips, and 10% avoid attending birthday parties simply because of a food allergy. Cross contact is another big concern, and that's what happens when one food meets another food and results in food containing small amounts of each other. And although this might seem insignificant, these trace amounts can and do cause allergic reactions in children with food allergies. So on the screen, this is just an example of many strategies that food allergy families need to use to mitigate their cross-contact risk. And I just want to highlight that soap and water are crucial when it comes to removing food allergens. Antibacterial gels, water alone, that does not suffice. And there are risks when other family members eat the child's allergens, even when they eat them outside the home. So for example, if mom or dad eats a peanut butter sandwich and then goes to give a child with a peanut allergy a kiss on the face, the child can end up having a reaction. And yes, this does happen. Let's see. And as this caregiver shared, we find it difficult to let go of our son. I go on every field trip and attend every class party. No one other than us and one grandparent ever prepares any meals for our son. This 2019 international study looked at prospective growth data from 430 patients from 12 different allergy centers around the world. And stunting was more common in children with food allergies than low rate, and about 5% were considered undernourished. Specifically, food allergy children at higher risk for poor growth include those with cow's milk allergy, avoiding 3 or more food allergens, non-IgE-mediated food allergies, which includes FPIEs, as well as those that have a mixed IgE, non-IgE-mediated food allergy. And as you can see, there are many interconnected potential contributing factors to growth faltering in food allergy. Again, kids that avoid more foods are at higher risk for nutrition concerns. And I can't stress the importance of finding safe and nutritionally suitable alternatives. The downside is that specialty foods can cost double or triple what standard foods cost. So for example, I have a brand name granola bar that costs about 32 cents per granola bar and comes in a box of 8. In contrast, a granola bar from a company that is free from the top allergens costs 74 cents each and comes in a box of 6. which is just another reason why 27% of caregivers report food allergies cause a significant impact on family finances. Let's explore the complexities of finding a milk alternative. So for most kids without a milk allergy, cow's milk plays an important role in providing protein, fat, calcium, and vitamin D. But cow's milk substitutes vary significantly in regards to nutrition profile, which is one reason why kids with cow's milk allergy are at higher risk for growth concerns. Take almond milk, for example. In general, almond milk has less calories, protein, and fat than cow's milk, in addition to more added sugar. And to be honest, most almond milks that I've seen in stores locally contain only about 1 to 2 grams of protein. That five grams might be pushing it. Next, let's compare that to soy or pea protein milk. In general, both of these options would be nutritionally comparable alternative for those with cow's milk allergy. And then we have the breakdown for many other plant-based milk options available commercially. The key takeaway here is that while every patient has individualized needs, in general, soy milk or pea protein milk are going to be the best alternatives for those with cow's milk allergy. And yes, there are brands of pea protein milk that taste good and are widely available at major grocery stores, even here in Iowa. But since our focus is psychosocial impacts of food allergies, I want to raise another issue specific to kids with both milk and soy allergy. Beyond the nutritional differences between cow's milk and almond milk, I really don't recommend it for kids because of the growing amount of nut-free schools. Because if that child attends a school that has a nut-free policy, then they just can't drink almond milk there, which again is another reason to encourage pea protein or even oat milk from a young age for those that have cow's milk and soy milk allergies. And of course, infant formula or breast milk should be the sole source of milk until at least 1 year of age. But even beyond that first year of life, those with a milk allergy may benefit from continued breast milk or even a commercial formula if there are any feeding difficulties or existing micronutrient deficiencies. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this next slide, but it really is a great example of why the nutrition management of food allergy really depends on that clear clinical diagnosis. So there's a lot going on the slide, but it's a good visual on how the nuances of nutrition care differ based on the actual diagnosis or type of food allergy. And the quick summary is that the vast majority of infants with cow's milk allergy will be fine with an extensively hydrolyzed formula, which is sometimes also referred to as short peptide formula. There are some exemptions which recommend amino acid formulas as the first line approach, and that's going to include EOE, those that have a history of growth faltering, and any infants that have actually had anaphylaxis to cow's milk. So simple activities that many families take for granted, like going to restaurants, schools, and other social events, can be so overwhelming for some food allergy families that they just avoid them altogether. Families must either bring safe food for their child or rely on others to have sufficient knowledge of label reading and cross-contact issues. And as this written survey response conveys, we are unable to leave our daughter in the care of others, which greatly impacts our social relationships as well as our marriage. We are not able to let her play or sleep at friends' homes without one of us, and we as a couple have been unable to go out for an evening or a vacation without children. Another source of parental stress and anxiety is simply the decision of whether or not to do an oral food challenge when the option is presented. So this is a procedure that involves consuming a known or suspected allergen in a controlled setting to basically see if the patient will have a reaction or not. There's two primary uses of an oral food challenge. The first is to aid in food allergy diagnosis, as oral ingestion is really the gold standard when it comes to confirming a diagnosis. But more commonly, we're seeing it used to assess for natural tolerance, which is basically when someone grows out of an allergy. There are many different protocols out there. On the screen is an example of a 6-dose protocol for someone with the IgE food allergy from the Quad AI work group report. Regardless of the protocol, Food challenges are long and stressful events for a patient and their family. So first, it's going to start with the 2 to 4 hour fast, depending on the patient's age. And then increasing amounts of the allergen are given every 15 to 30 minutes. So just do the math. You're looking probably around 3 hours. And if you've ever spent 3 hours in a tiny room with a toddler, you can imagine how stressful this experience can be for parents. Plus, then there's the added anxiety of your child having an allergic reaction. The protein can be given as food, like a baked muffin, or as a protein powder in a vehicle like applesauce. And the best case scenario, this challenge will take several hours in the clinic or hospital while the patient is being monitored for any signs of an allergic response. And then they're discharged with additional plans to continue regular exposure to that challenge food. In fact, when I think of oral food challenges, I most always associate with baked milk or baked egg. That always is what comes to mind first, because up to 70% of kids can tolerate cow's milk or egg allergy, because up to 75% of children with cow's milk or egg allergy can tolerate the baked version. And this is because heating disrupts the structure of those specific proteins, which results in making them less allergenic. There are standardized recipes to control how much protein is used in the food challenge, and to be considered baked, generally the item needs to be in a flour matrix, needs to be baked for at least 30 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and it must be baked enough so that the center is not wet or soggy. Let's see. Food allergen ladders like the IMAP ladder pictured here are sometimes used to help establish tolerance to baked milk, cheese, yogurt, and other forms of processed milk. Similarly, the heating or fermentation process is believed to disrupt the structure of those specific proteins, which makes them less allergenic. The milk ladder was originally intended for home introduction with children in the UK with mild to moderate non-IgE-mediated food allergy. And I just want to point out that the definition of food allergy is slightly different in the UK than what we're used to here in the States. And remember, it's difficult to classify an IgE-mediated food allergy as mild or severe because so many external factors can influence that reaction threshold. However, we are seeing a little bit of clinical use of this ladder with the IgE-mediated cow's milk allergy, perhaps because there were published guidelines from the British Society for Allergy and Clinical Immunology. But that said, I think the jury is still out. There's at least one key study coming out in the next 2 years that should move the needle either way when it comes to using ladders outside of the mild to moderate non-IgE mediated food allergy. Now I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about early intervention and food allergy risk reduction, as this has kind of been a hot topic in recent years and also comes with its own set of psychosocial challenges. So first, our current understanding is that infants at the greatest risk of food allergy include those with severe eczema, as well as a potentially increased risk in infants with a history of mild to moderate eczema, a family history of atopic disease in at least one parent, and those with a known food allergy diagnosis. So just to do a quick review of the LEAP trial, it included over 600 infants who were determined to be at risk for peanut allergy. They were then further stratified into 2 separate cohorts based on skin prick test results. In each cohort, there was an early intervention group and an avoidance group. So overall, between looking at both those cohorts, 3.2% of the consumption group developed peanut allergy compared to 17.2% in the avoidance group. Now, the LEAP trial was by no means perfect, but the big takeaway from this trial is that early exposure to peanut through the skin, like in the breakdown of a skin barrier in those with eczema, may lead to sensitization and food allergy, while early dietary exposure may lead to establishing tolerance. It's not just the LEAP trial. There is a significant and growing body of research supporting these early intervention guidelines, but in the interest of time, I've just listed the studies for your reference. So let's break down the addendum guidelines for prevention of peanut allergy in the United States. Guideline number 1 is for infants with severe eczema and or egg allergy. And I'm going to refer you directly to the addendum guidelines for all the information because it talks about using blood tests and or possibly skin prick tests prior to early intervention, as well as if peanut should be introduced at home or after an allergy referral. But let's look a little more closely at guidelines 2 and 3. So guideline 2, infants with mild to moderate eczema should have introduction of age-appropriate peanut-containing food around 6 months of age to reduce the risk of peanut allergy. So peanuts should not be the first food, but definitely one of the first. And this is just to demonstrate that infants are developmentally ready for solids. So with this group, peanut introduction can be done in-home with some of the resources I'll share next. However, some caregivers or even healthcare providers may prefer an in-office supervised feeding, which I want to stress that's not the same thing as an oral food challenge, which could be recommended for those that fall under guideline number 1. And then guideline number 3 is for infants without eczema or any other food allergy, but it still supports and encourages early introduction, maybe with just like a little less urgency than for those with mild to moderate or even severe risk. Because a good percentage of kids with peanut allergy never have eczema or other food allergies, which again are those 2 significant risk factors. And early introduction is generally considered safe. There's no evidence that exists for restricting those common food allergens in infants without known or suspected food allergy. Again, these guidelines are not perfect, but they are much better than nothing. We followed them with my 2 youngest children. So one was fine and the other did have a reaction, but as scary as widespread hives are on a 6-month-old, I can only imagine how much worse his reaction would have been if we had given him an age-appropriate serving of peanut butter around 10 or 12 months, which is what we did for my oldest child before these guidelines were available. So where are we at as a country with early peanut introduction? So this parent-reported survey was completed in early 2021, and it gives us some insight. So overall, only 13% of parents and caregivers are aware of these new addendum guidelines. And parents, caregivers report a wide spectrum of peanut feeding practices. So most notably, a third of parents are introducing peanut-containing foods after 12 months. And overall, 58% report discussing peanut introduction with their primary care provider, which is great. That's over half. But almost 3/4 of this group said this discussion occurred at or after 6 months of age. Also concerning is that 1 in 10 report their PCP told them to delay peanut introduction until after 2 years of age. So the addendum guidelines, again, while not perfect, do provide general instructions for how families can introduce peanut at home with these low-risk infants. And these are some talking points that can be shared with patients. So obviously, you don't want to introduce any new food if a baby has a cold, vomiting, diarrhea, or other illness that could potentially have similar symptoms as a food allergy reaction. The first peanut exposure should be at home, not daycare, not a restaurant. And one adult needs to be able to give their full attention to the infant. If there are other kids at home, there should be a different adult available to supervise them. And finally, parents need to be able to watch for signs of a reaction for at least 2 hours after the peanut exposure. So a quick feeding before rushing out of the door is not a good idea. The addendum guidelines do include 4 different recipes for home peanut introduction, and the resource is on the slide for those specific recipes. In fact, this is an addendum to the guide, or excuse me, an appendix within the guidelines, and I've even given it as a PDF handout to patients. So regardless of which recipe is used, the guidelines provide instructions on how to serve it. So they suggest preparing the full portion that's included in the recipe, but only giving 1 small bite, waiting 10 minutes, and then if there's no initial reaction, slowly give the remainder of the portion at the infant's usual eating speed. And if you have anxious parents, it can help to review the signs of mild and severe allergic reactions, as well as what to do if these occur. Because parents are delaying early introduction over the unlikely fear of a severe allergic reactions, I've even had parents tell me they plan to sit in the ER parking lot to introduce peanut butter to their child, which is a bit of an overkill. If you look at the numbers, if 2% of American children have a peanut allergy, that means 98% do not. So back to that 2021 survey, primary care provider counseling was the most common facilitator for peanut introduction before 7 months, whereas fear of reaction was the most common reason for delaying peanut introduction beyond 7 months. So to repeat, less than 3% of infants actually have peanut allergy, and it's rare to have anaphylaxis to the amount of this peanut at 6 months. So as primary care providers, you play a key role in communicating these early introduction guidelines. I know we covered a lot today, but my hope is that you'll walk away understanding that nutrition management of food allergy is complex, and it's so much more than just food labels. Also, that food allergy is increasing worldwide, not just here in the United States. We now have 9 major food allergens, but really any food can become an allergen. And novel food trends are carrying significant implications for those with food allergies, like, for example, the trend of crickets. Chocolate-covered crickets can cause a reaction in those with shellfish allergy. So food allergy management is much more individualized than it's been in past decades, especially when food allergy dietitians are involved in the care team. And when we think of all the psychosocial impact of food allergy that we've discussed today, what really comes to my mind is that knowledge is power. There's so much outdated and misleading information available, in part because research and best practices are changing so rapidly. It can be hard to keep up. So what can we do to address the psychosocial impact of pediatric food allergy? First, we need to hold space to validate the lived experiences of food allergy families. Second, whenever possible, avoid unnecessary elimination diets. Compare detailed food and symptom histories to the list of common trigger foods. And remember that the list changes depending on the type of food allergy. Cutting out long lists of food or doing blanket panel testing without just suspicion can really do more harm than good, especially when we're talking about infants or picky eaters. We're looking at more oral food challenges in order to demonstrate tolerance to these false positives, plus possibly looking at growth concerns, nutrition deficiencies, feeding difficulties, taste or texture delays, and more. Also, patient education is huge. Food labeling law is complex, it's nuanced, and to be successful in managing food allergies, family really needs a thorough understanding of allergen avoidance. As primary care providers, if it's outside your comfort or resources or even time to give the due diligence to comprehensive food allergy education, then the best thing you can do for your patients is to refer to a dietitian that specializes in food allergy, because it really is a specialty area for dietitians. But if you have time to do one thing, please ask caregivers to demonstrate how they would use their epinephrine autoinjectors. Don't just ask them if they have one or if they know how to use it. Have them demonstrate to you or your staff. It only takes 10 seconds. And it's really important, because when patients and caregivers are confident that they can treat a severe reaction, it really does decrease some of the anxiety over all those little what if scenarios, and it takes away some of that fear with eating. And finally, we can empower families to be more confident with early introduction of peanuts and other common allergens. Early introduction will not magically prevent all food allergies, but it can reduce the risk for food allergy development, especially in those high-risk infants. Kids with Food Allergies, which is a division of the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, has a free online course that parents can take to learn more about managing their child's food allergies. It's presented by Dr. Dave Stukas from Nationwide's Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and he is really a fantastic speaker. So when you have a new food allergy patient, this should be at the top of the list for resources for that family. FAIR also offers free webinars for both food allergy families and healthcare providers on a wide variety of topics. And if you really want to learn more about food allergy nutrition, they have a fantastic 9-month certificate of training in pediatric food allergy program. New this year, just June of this year, the Health Professional's Guide to Nutrition Management of Food Allergy was published as a joint venture between FAIR and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. That's another great resource. And of course, don't forget about us food allergy dietitians. Before we open up to questions, I want to leave you with this. 41% of caregivers of food allergic children report a significant increase in stress, and 1 in 5 or 6 report significant impact on parent or sibling relationships. So the final resource I want to share is the Food Allergy Counselor Directory, which is a list of allergy-informed therapists organized by state. So that leads me to any questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This was such an informative presentation, and we now have time to dive into questions. And so please feel free to type your question into the Q&A, and we'll cover as many questions as time allows. To kick us off, I wanted to ask a question that was submitted during registration, and that is, why are there so many allergies currently that didn't appear in the past?
This is a good question. First off, we definitely know that the prevalence is increasing. Peanut allergy is a big one, but really the prevalence of all allergies is increasing. And it's really a multifactorial answer. There's lots of different theories out there. There's the clean hypothesis, where our environments are a lot more cleaner than they were, generations ago, and so our bodies are now using those instead of fighting parasites, we're now fighting food protein. There's also the root exposure. So if we're exposed to allergens through skin breakdown, like with eczema, it's a higher risk for developing food allergies. Instead of if we're exposed early through the GI tract, that can be more preventative. So there's really so many proposed mechanisms and reasons. It's really hard to say. But I think it's important when answering this question that we don't get stuck focusing on the why there's a food allergy, especially when we're with an individual patient. I've heard of families voicing frustration over being drilled, why their child has a food allergy. And then the parent starts internalizing, it was something I did. It was a choice that I made that caused this to my child. So we have to be really careful, when we're asking this question, that we're not implying that it's someone's fault.
Okay, thank you. What are some recommendations for how to keep children safe in school and in daycare settings? And I know that's a challenging one, but
this is a really big one. I think one, starting with education. So for example, my food allergy child, when he was 2, we started teaching him how to self-carry his epinephrine auto-injectors. So that was a responsibility that he started taking on at age 2. When we leave the house, do we have the EpiPen? Is the Epi bag with us? And our expectation when he's in preschool is that we're still going through those mechanisms. Yes, his preschool has a second set of EpiPens available in case of an emergency, but we want him to learn the importance of, anywhere you go, you take your EpiPens with you, so that as he grows older, it's less of, it's just habit, it's routine. You take it everywhere you go. That brings up kind of a controversial point when it comes to keeping kids safe in schools, the idea of whether or not kids should self-carry. And again, this is an important point. Parents should definitely be considered in shared decision-making. And I know school districts have policies that can influence that. But the bottom line is, if emergency medicine is not available when someone needs it, how is it going to help. If the EpiPens are locked in a cupboard or in a nurse's office, on the other side of the school where the cafeteria is, and the child has a reaction in the cafeteria, how is the emergency medicine going to get to that child in a quickly and timely manner? So that's just one area. Also looking at education, awareness, peer understanding. There's a lot that goes into it.
Okay, thank you. And can you talk a little bit more about the difference or the distinction between food allergy and food intolerance?
That's a good question. So with allergy, it is an immune-mediated reaction. So it involves the immune system, whereas the food intolerance, it's an adverse food reaction, but it does not involve the immune system. So a lot of times when we hear food intolerance, we automatically lactose intolerance comes to mind. And with food intolerance, there's usually a spectrum of where an individual's tolerance lies. So when you're working with an individual, you're trying to figure out what's the amount that they can tolerate without, typically it's GI symptoms. So it's finding that kind of sweet spot. Whereas with food allergies, we're talking about complete avoidance, because any amount, even trace amounts in some patients can cause food allergy reactions.
Okay, thank you. And then I wanted to see if there were some online resources. I know you shared that the website for FAIR. Is that one of the best resources for families on looking at those best practices for managing food allergies, or are there other sources that you recommend to families as they're trying to find information and about food allergies and managing food allergies?
So when looking at pediatric food allergies, the top two resources I recommend is going to be FAIR. They've got lots of great resources, trainings, videos. But then Kids with Food Allergies is another great resource. The free course for newly diagnosed for parents, which is great. That's through Kids with Food Allergies. And they also have several downloadable guides that you can use for navigating decisions, like talking to school or talking to daycare about food allergies, or they've even got a pretty detailed list of hidden sources of food allergens and craft supplies. So those would probably be my first two resources.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was really surprised to learn all the allergens that are in everyday products like hand soap and, other like crafting supplies. So that's really great information. And so it looks like we've covered all the questions. And so we'll close today with a couple of housekeeping announcements. This course was certified for AMA PRA Category 1 credit. Attendees are eligible to claim continuing education credit by completing the evaluation and downloading their certificate of participation. The step-by-step instructions on how to claim credit are included in the handout in the chat section, but I will also send this in the follow-up email after the webinar. So please feel free to reach out if there are any questions. You can reach me at Kafi, Kafi-Dixon, Dixon at uiowa.edu. And so in closing, I just want to thank Lisa for presenting on this really important topic, and thank you all for attending. Have a great afternoon.